That was kind of when I sort of abandoned my chess career, when I realized that there was some real money that could be made. Then I started playing 5-10. I found another game in New York. This was all in New York for the first couple of years, and and then I got very fortunate. Someone who was playing with me in the 5-10 game, he knew somebody who knew somebody, kind of thing, who used to, who played at the Mayfair Club. And he heard that there was this new game starting at the Mayfair Club. The Mayfair Club was a bridge or backgammon club. It wasn't a poker club. Yeah. And back in like 1984, a few of these world-class backgammon players started playing like little poker freeze-outs with like backgammon chips, and a deck of cards. All the materials were there. That people played gin there as well, and bridge. So there was a deck of cards, there were some chips, as in backgammon checkers, and they managed to start playing some poker. And then eventually they got a poker table, and that was about when I showed up, was right when they started playing like a real game, at like a full table. So it was this amazing environment for me. Here were these weak poker players. They were just getting started playing, and I was pretty weak too back then. But at least I'd been playing pretty seriously for a couple of years. So I had a bit of an advantage there in terms of I knew a little more about poker than they did. But these were, world champion bridge and backgammon players.
Yeah.
Were really, really sharp guys. And also, very successful Wall Street traders. And, these are guys that had figured out games and become world class in their games. I'd never come into contact with anybody like that.
Would you say, yeah? Would you say one thing that is very interesting? I think that comes up. It's like the social bit is quite in poker circles and maybe even backgammon circles and bridge. It's quite funny people. They have stories. They have a good head on their shoulders. Is it a good group to hang around with? You know what I mean?
Oh, it's a great group. These are some of my oldest and best friends: Eric Seidel, Steve Zolotow, Dan Harrington, Jason Lester, Mickey Appleman, Jay Heinwitz.
Wow.
This is quite a home game that I was cutting my teeth in,
That's a good bunch of guys, huh?
And, so I couldn't have become the poker player I became without those guys. Poker is a social thing. Poker, you can't figure out how to become a great poker player all on your own. I don't think, at least not in this modern day. Maybe it's possible, but it would take a tremendous amount of time. So what we were doing was, the game would usually start around 4 o'clock. That was kind of when Wall Street would shut down for the day, and some of the Wall Street traders would show up at the club, and we'd get the game going. And we might play till midnight, we might play till 1 in the morning, but eventually the game would break up. And that's when we retire to like a bar around the corner, and we might spend the next 2 or 3 hours talking about hands with each other. And that kind of give and take, that kind of thinking about the game deeply, that kind of like, hey, well, I had that hand. What were you thinking when you made that play? That allowed all of us to get so much better, so much faster. Now, I think in a lot of ways, the modern players, the young, internet whiz kids, they aren't interacting that kind of way. They aren't playing, a single table live poker from 4 to midnight and then going to a bar and talking with their buddies necessarily. But what they're doing is they've got these books, they've got these training videos, they've got poker on TV to watch, they've got forums, they've got a tremendous number of hands that they can play compared to the number of hands that I was able to play back then. So that type of social thing, is sort of on steroids these days.
Yeah, for sure.
But and I think I really got lucky to stumble into that kind of collaborative, sort of environment. I think that was much more rare back then. Now you really can't help but find some type of sort of collaborative environment where you can really improve your game.
Yeah, I've been thinking quite a lot of, sort of the lost generation in a way, and which is an interesting question. Is you guys? You were a bunch of guys that kept on playing poker and then kept making money of that, and maybe was fine and settled with that and didn't aim to do big deeds in other areas. Some of them did, but do you think there's quite a few potential geniuses in other areas solving the problems in nature and professors, stuff like that went lost in the poker boom and in the poker playing? You know what I'm saying here?
Well, yeah, certainly I think any truly captivating or potentially captivating or interesting, field of endeavor is going to suck some talent out of other fields.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any, yeah, I guess that's the downside, or one of the downsides, potentially for poker. But I think the net effect, I mean, it's such a great game. It teaches people so much about themselves, so much about life. Think about how many millions of people are playing the game and getting really interesting, good feedback about themselves, able to approach situations at the table if they're so inclined, and think about how those same types of situations come up in life. I mean, life is a negotiation, right?
Of course.
A poker hand is basically a negotiation.
That's the thing that's been underestimated, the social value of poker. I mean, you have poker players from any age, and you play with your grandma, and any, I mean, 1 cent or big money. That is something that is not enough appreciated among the people who are against poker. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think they get it. Look, one of our original big opponents, he still is a guy named Bob Goodlatte, who certainly was one of the champions of the UIGA in those early days. He was quoted as saying, I've played poker. I know poker's all luck. I do think sometimes our opponents, just out of pure ignorance, they don't understand the game. They don't see that when people are playing the game of poker, their brain is just on, it is firing, it is thinking, it is, calculating. It's trying to master emotional control. There are so many important skills that are actually being developed at the poker table. And I don't think they get it. I mean, if we were to, run one of those modern brain scans, on someone who was playing poker and compare it to someone who was like watching TV, I have a feeling, the person watching TV, the brain's going to come up all blue. I don't
just
think
cold. Yeah.
There's not much going on. And look, I'm not even going to knock that. I think that there is value occasionally in having an hour or so where you're kind of turned off a little bit. You're just enjoying, you're just soaking up TV, you're watching a movie or whatever. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that if you looked at those brain scans of someone playing poker, you're going to see some very important areas of the brain that are firing pretty hard.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's very interesting. How did you get into? When was your first contact with business, including poker? I mean, going from just playing until trying to find some way to do business out of it.
Well, really, there wasn't much business to be done in poker until the early 2000s. I was a player. I was just out there playing. I was playing in the big cash games in Vegas. At that point, I got my start in the mid '80s in New York. I moved to Vegas in '93. Yeah. Back then, like, the big game was 3 and 600, maybe some 4 and 800 occasionally. If the right guy showed up in town, we might get an 8 and 1600 game going. I started playing in those games and doing well in those games, starting in the early '90s, mid '90s. And I was doing that. I was playing the occasional tournament, but more concentrating on cash game play, live cash game play. Obviously, there was no internet poker yet, until 2001. I would say is the year that I saw the potential. And people credit the World Poker Tour, and look, the World Poker Tour deserves a lot of credit. But the original poker show on TV was Late Night Poker in England. That was the first poker hit. And that same company, Matchroom, that did Late Night Poker, decided to do a big live event on TV. And it was called the Poker Million. And it was held, I believe, in the Isle of Man.
Yeah, I remember that. I've seen that a couple of times.
And I think it was very early 2001. I could be a little off. But it was definitely winter. It could have been December of 2000, but I think it was, I believe it was January or February of 2001. And a bunch of Americans came over, and I was one of that group. And I was fortunate enough, I guess, in a weird way, to get knocked out and not